St. George, the patron saint of England, picked out in diamonds, a gift from Queen Elizabeth I of England to King James of Scotland, who was to succeed her as the first king of Great Britain over 400 years ago. Over the centuries, kings and queens have built castles and palaces and filled them with works of art and treasures of all kinds. Many have been available to the public for years. In fact, the first public guidebook to Windsor Castle was published over 200 years ago. But today, the medium of television allows an even wider public to enjoy this royal heritage. For the last 2 years, a BBC team has been recording the remarkable story of Britain's royal builders and collectors. And Sir Huw Wheldon, former head of BBC Television and a leading broadcaster in Britain, will be your guide to some of the treasures of the British Crown.
The oldest of all the royal buildings is the Tower of London, built nearly 1,000 years ago by William the Conqueror after the invasion of England in 1066. The marks of kings and princes are spread through time and space across the country. They include these great 12th century castles which Edward I put round the remote and desolate coast of Wales. Holyrood, in the heart of the city of Edinburgh, used as a royal palace to this day. Hampton Court Palace on the Thames. In the 1500s, Henry VIII alone inherited 8 palaces and built 8 more, all of them vast. This was one of his. It's got 1,300 rooms, substantial rooms, not counting little ones. Even the modern monarchy, as we shall see, is based upon palaces and residences across the country. But the heart of the monarchy today beats here, in the middle of London, in Buckingham Palace. This is where the Queen lives. It's also where other heads of state, presidents and kings, and other great figures, archbishops, cardinals, prime ministers, generals, are entertained. This particular reception is for 1,000 diplomats from all over the world. Buckingham Palace, like all the royal palaces, is a memorable building in its own right. It also helps house, as do all the palaces, the greatest personal collection of works of art in the entire world. Leonardo da Vinci, Titian, Rembrandt. There are 3 Rembrandts in this room alone. This one, as it happens, is the Queen's favourite picture. It's one of Rembrandt's marvellous studies of old age, simultaneously so truthful and so tender. There are Holbein's, of course, about 80 portrait drawings altogether, apart from the paintings. Holbein was Henry VIII's court painter. and somehow he caught exactly the deviousness and strength and cunning of Henry VIII's great Tudor court in the 1500s. It's extraordinary what you find in the royal palaces. There are Canalettos, and they have little or nothing to do with Britain. They're mainly paintings of Venice, and in fact they were bought by George III in 1762. They simply took his fancy. He bought about 40 of them altogether. They're still here, a wonderful set, and they provide, among other things, a marvelous vista of the Grand Canal in Venice. These huge canvases are by Raphael, the young prodigy who was the contemporary of Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. This is one of the greatest series of paintings ever painted. Raphael was a singularly sweet-tempered and gentle young person. And these qualities are to be seen quite straightforwardly in these marvelous paintings. This is the miraculous draught of fishes. You might almost say that this young Italian invented the way in which to paint biblical characters. It's as if henceforward all Bible figures borrow from this original and originating vision. One of the attractive things about these paintings, these are the children of King Charles I by Van Dyck, is that the palaces in which most of them hang are not dead museums. This, after all, is one of the homes of the Queen, a centre of life and activity.
Well, I think it's one of the very special pictures in the collection, this. And it's quite interesting. I mean, you know, when you think Charles I had his children painted, and there is Charles II, and also James II, two kings. And then the other daughter was the mother of William of Orange. That I think was Anne. I think she was called Anne. I was telling you that the family names don't change very much because there was Mary and Elizabeth and Anne. And of course, this room we redecorated this. And this is one really rather nice. I think it's a nice room. This Ron's
Most of the decor of Buckingham Palace takes its colour and style from Queen Victoria and her husband Prince Albert, who occupied it during the 19th century. Like the Capitol in Washington, it's full of gilded splendours. They were built, after all, at much the same time. It's all, not surprisingly, ornate and very formal. But to the young Queen Victoria, in 1837, it stood for freedom, a new lease of life. Victoria, as a child, had been dominated by her mother. She slept in her mother's bedroom every night of her life until she was 18. She was allowed hardly any friends. At 18, however, she became queen. And from that moment onwards, she never was again under her mother's thumb. From that day on, she never again slept in her mother's room. Within a matter of weeks, young and clear-eyed, she had moved herself and her household into Buckingham Palace. This is the throne room, from which she presided for 63 years, over an empire which included over a quarter of the population of the entire world. All the palaces are centres of surprisingly complex and many-sided activities, and they call for the services of several hundred men and women. Buckingham Palace, of course, like any palace, has got miles of corridors and many staircases, And when Queen Victoria came to the throne, it must have been quite a business finding one's way around what was in those days a rather disorganized place. In fact, it was found that a boy called Cotton, the boy Cotton, had lived inside Buckingham Palace for a year without anybody knowing at all. He'd slept in chimneys, this boy, and behind forgotten corners, quite comfortably apparently, like a bird or a cat.
Nothing very serious happened to him when they found him, I'm happy to say. A fair amount of palace activity must of necessity be quite literally below stairs.
Easy, darling. I'll take you straight upstairs. 2 tall jar veals, the Monteith bowls, 72 plates,
Yes.
24 dishes for the royal pastry. Then we can make a start on the royal table. Here we go, Bob. Right, got it. This will work a bit.
Funeral march.
We'll take it straight up
Right,
and get rid of it quick.
right.
This centrepiece weighs nearly as much as the boy. All these are 18th century.
Now, you've got to go left to the Steve, over.
Is it?
Right. Now, can we lift it over to my right a little, please?
Right.
Relax.
That's my lot.
This way. That's fine. Just have a look. That's fine.
These plates are from one of the many priceless and huge dinner services which are in regular use. Waterford glass, made in Ireland 200 years ago. There were 2,000 pieces originally, and there are upwards of 1,700 still left.
That's fine. The trailer's outward, Stephen, please.
These are Sèvres wine bottle coolers and ice pails and soup tureens which they're using as flower vases. Each one is worth something in the neighborhood of $30,000.
Take it easy, please.
This particular room was built expressly to commemorate the Battle of Waterloo, England's greatest victory over Napoleon. Every year a dinner is held to celebrate the battle, and the present Duke presents a flag to the Queen. It's presented in homage. At the same time, it also serves instead of rent, a most agreeable device. It's a kind of token rent for the large estates given by a grateful nation to the Duke's great ancestor. The ancestor, meanwhile, the Iron Duke, surveys these cheerful proceedings in his own impassive way. It's curious to reflect that, so far as I know, there's no comparable room or monument which commemorates Churchill, Roosevelt and Eisenhower and all the victors of World War II. The guest sitting next to the Duke of Edinburgh is the Crown Princess of Japan. Buckingham Palace
was originally a relatively small private house, Buckingham House, which over the years became the palace. Behind the familiar facade in the middle of London lie gardens and courts and quadrangles. It has changed and grown with the centuries, and not unnaturally, it was a target for Hitler's Luftwaffe when the bombs started to rain on London in 1940. The Queen Mother, now 77 years old, was the Queen at that time, and with her husband, King George VI, she was a consoling figure during the long months of bombing and devastation. Her own home, colder than most because it was so big and we didn't have heating during the war, did not escape.
Well, we were in this little room looking out on the quadrangle where the king worked quite a lot and all, because the sun came into it. On the other side, palace, you know, was in the shade, which made a difference, you know. And then when we were there, and then we had this plane coming down the Mall. And then there wasn't any warning at all. And then this extraordinary scream that a bomb makes, you know. And the first one, this exploded in the quadrangle, really not very far from us. We saw it actually explode. And a great column of water came into the air, I remember. Then and it also hit some of the great drain system too. And one nasty thing was that the garden got inundated with rats, horrible rats. However, everybody had great fun pursuing them, trying to shoot them. He dropped a whole stick, you know, right across the palace. The only one that did very much damage was a direct hit on the chapel, which caught it rather badly. There was always one that disappeared. We counted 5, and I think there were 6. Somewhere in the garden, I expect. I think that was us looking round to see what had gone. I asked Cecil Beaton to take these really just to remind us of what strong state that house was in, you know. Because most of the pictures, naturally, had gone, and some of the furniture. And there were no windows at all left at the end of the war. Just, and these are all cisterns and baths in these the sort of main rooms in the palace to catch the rain coming through. Yes, there were holes in the ceilings and things like that. Poor old house.
In the end, Buckingham Palace, like the kingdom, was to be rebuilt and recreated once more. Royal residences are not confined to London. They're spread across the country. Thus, Osborne House is on an island, the Isle of Wight, which lies off the south coast of England. It's a country house rather than a palace, and it was Queen Victoria and Prince Albert who built it. They built it for themselves in the 1840s. Prince Albert was a German prince, extremely talented, handsome, and well-educated. They were married when he was 20 and she was 3 months older. She proposed to him, and it was a love match from start to finish. What Osborne gave them was privacy, a quiet place in which to bring up a family. Prince Albert designed the whole place himself. He didn't believe in architects. He was a genuine designer in his own right, and he worked closely with a builder called Thomas Cubitt. Part of the house had to accommodate all the staterooms and paraphernalia which a fully operational, if temporary, palace requires. At the other end, he built what was called the pavilion. This was strictly for the family, an entirely private, domestic residence. It's now a museum.
This was the Queen's bedroom. Everything here, in fact everything in this whole private suite, this pavilion, has been left as it was when she died. And it was here in this room that she did die. For the young pair, it must have been entrancing. It has these marvellous views over the Italian gardens, down across the park into Osborne Bay and the Solent. The place is simply enough, if solidly furnished. Mahogany bed, mahogany cupboards, mahogany wardrobe, everything very compact, including the way in which the wardrobe works. In fact, you came through part of the wardrobe and into the dressing room. Again, it's a very handsome room with the same views through the windows. The windows, incidentally, both in this room and indeed in all the pavilion, were mass-produced in London. Cubits, brand new methods of mass production and cost efficiency were very much what had appealed to the Prince in the first place. The pavilion, by the way, was designed and put up in about a year, and what's more, it was brought in under budget. The whole house was fireproofed, everything worked, the plumbing was excellent, the shower was in here, nice broad drop of water, everything as ever compact and extremely effective. This was the bath, solidly and housed in mahogany, copper inside. The mirror and the bowls on the dressing table are all Minton, and they were a gift from the young prince to Queen Victoria. It was entirely characteristic of the Prince that he should put plate glass to good effect, and not least in this room, which was positively an invention in its own right. Not simply in terms of the window, but in terms of the room as a whole. Osborne, of course, was supposed to be a family household, a retreat, and comparatively speaking, it was informal. It remained, nevertheless, very much the Queen's residence, and gentlemen of the household couldn't sit in her presence. And the Prince's invention lay in this, that he made this into an L-shaped drawing room, so the gentlemen were able to withdraw naturally, moving backwards, from her presence, round this corner, into the L part of the room, where they could, in fact, sit down and chat with their friends and their companions. They couldn't smoke. The Queen was very much against smoking. In later years, she relented a little and did allow a smoking room to be built alongside the house. You can only get into it through the garden. But chat, they could. And they could also, if they so chose, play billiards on a billiard table, which you will not be surprised to hear, was also designed by the Prince Consort, along with what we might call Renaissance embellishments. He wrote songs, too. This song was written and composed by the Prince in his native German. He really was indefatigably inventive. Equally, of course, Osborne came to bear the stamp of the Queen's preoccupations. What she wanted round her, above all, were souvenirs.
She was a person who formed passionate attachments to friends and to pets and to places, and what she wanted was to be everlastingly reminded of them. This was the mother who so dominated her childhood. The Queen's demands sometimes took surprising shape. Thus she arranged that her children, all 9 of them, all her children, should have their tiny feet and hands modelled in marble. Winterhalter painted this. He had great confidence and panache. He was also one of the Queen's favourite painters, and this wasn't surprising. What she liked was a good likeness, and she wasn't alone in that. This is the Queen with the baby Prince Arthur on the terrace. And this is Prince Arthur with his godfather, the Duke of Wellington. The Duke was said not to like this portrait, and I'm not really surprised. But it's a good painting. There's a lot of good painting and good sculpture, too.
The sculpture included this portrayal of the prince himself, rather unexpectedly dressed in Roman armour. The prince also commissioned this huge fresco from William Dyce, the Scottish painter and authority who'd been so much involved with the process of getting the decorations done in the Palace of Westminster. The governesses and the maids-in-waiting who occupy these 2 floors were very scandalized by having all these naked people so boldly and so large on the actual wall. And Prince Albert was a bit nervous too. The Queen, however, was entirely unperturbed by any such considerations. She liked it. It's called Neptune entrusting the command of the seas to Britannia. And you can see Neptune handing over his crown to Britannia. It's a highly patriotic, to put it mildly, a highly patriotic essay in the style of Raphael, also, as a matter of fact, to put it mildly. The pigment in fresco painting has to be applied direct onto the plaster while the plaster's still wet. It's a difficult enough business at the best of times. And Dyce found it more taxing even than usual because he was forever being interrupted by offers of help from the indefatigable prince. Anyway, it all seemed to work all right, because whatever else you might think of the picture, the colours are certainly as fresh and as glowing as if they'd been put on this morning. The colours in the whole of Osborne, in fact, were and remain quite marvellous.
The Queen and Prince eventually had 9 children and set about educating them in a fashion entirely characteristic both of themselves and of the age they lived in. Thus, all royal children had gardens and their own gardening tools, all to scale. They were expected to carry out what would nowadays be called gardening projects. They were professionally criticised and they were paid by the hour. Nearby was this fortress, which they themselves helped build, complete with moats and redoubts and earthworks and cannon. It's a terrific fortress. It's got a drawbridge. It's got an outpost. Both boys and girls were also taught, goodness knows why, how to erect military tents. At the heart of all these arrangements for the children was this Swiss cottage. This was their centre. As with Cubit's windows, it was prefabricated, but this time completely, and this time it came from Switzerland. Here they did their own cooking and housekeeping. Once more, from all accounts, the whole thing was done very thoroughly.
Tea time at Osborne usually took place here in the Swiss cottage. It wasn't a matter simply for the children, but very much a family occasion, and it usually included scones and tea cakes and so on, made and prepared by the girls. There were enough chairs for everybody, and not much else, except, of course, for a desk, as usual, for the Queen. But not for official occasions. It was a desk at which she did a good deal of her drawing.
This etching is by her telling a familiar enough story. It's of herself with some of her own children. She also painted in oils. This is a child called Annie MacDonald, wearing a tartan, as it happens, designed by Prince Albert. But the Queen's favourite medium was watercolour. These are by her, as are many studies of Osborne, where she was to be visited by a crushing sorrow. Prince Albert himself, lacking in humour, or even humanity perhaps, was never really popular, but his dedication was immense, and he was energetic and inventive to a degree. Perhaps he worked himself out. Anyway, quite suddenly, at the age of 42, he died, leaving a shocked nation, 9 children, and a widow, bereft and inconsolable. Prince Albert, in his youth in Germany, had composed a song about the hard seasons, and after his death, Queen Victoria, in her own bleak midwinter, withdrew almost entirely to the home they'd built together on the Isle of Wight, Osborne, there to lead a kind of frozen life. This and other songs and duets he had written, no doubt, rang in her own sorrowing mind, and everything reminded her of her loss. Osborne itself was largely frozen. The mourning was ceaseless. Nothing was to be moved. Things were to be left exactly as they were.
The Queen's retreat to Osborne lasted for some years. She avoided state occasions. She refused to go into public places. She went to London as little as possible. And it was this that gradually began to rile people. It wasn't her rather extravagant mourning. It was this withdrawal. The relationship between the by now virtually invisible monarch and the public started to turn sour. During this period, she came to depend more and more upon a Highlander in her service called John Brown. He was devoted to her. She leant upon him. He was inevitably deeply unpopular with the rest of the household, and the whole business provided a handle for widespread and savage mutterings and calumnies. Mrs. Brown, they called her. Invisible to the world, they said, visible only to her kilted manservant. She paid no attention whatsoever to this slander. She'd got a good deal in common with the Duke of Wellington. But she remained a recluse, withdrawn, and the public didn't like it. What gradually brought her back to life was her own vitality. Disraeli helped. We authors, ma'am, as he said. So did her family, spread across Europe. But it was her own vigour and curiosity and alertness that won the day. And in this re-emergence into liveliness, she was much helped by the other home in Scotland, which she and Prince Albert had built between them, Balmoral. Balmoral sits foursquare and strong in a remote and magnificent setting. It was, and remains, a singularly cheerful and attractive dwelling. The famous tartan carpets, so often mocked, which are laid throughout most of the corridors and in so many of the rooms, seem to draw in the blue and green light of the landscape. The furnishings are largely in the blonde, pale woods, maple, pine, which Prince Albert liked, and which he was largely responsible for introducing into 19th century mansions in the United Kingdom. As always with the Prince Consort, details were taken seriously. Balmoral was built by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert very much as a private home, and it's still used as an entirely private home by the present Queen Elizabeth and her family. Outside the drawing room is a statue of St. Hubert, the patron saint of hunting and stalking, of which there was naturally a great deal. The scale of Balmoral remains small and domestic. Even Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales, has to make do with a study bedroom. This modesty did not prevent most of the royal families of Europe from coming here to visit Queen Victoria. When the Tsar of Russia came, practically the whole countryside was commandeered for beds. A host of events and occasions, international, national and local, took place then as they continue to do now. Among them, the annual ball for the gillies and staff of the estate. Principal guests on this particular occasion are King Baudouin, King of the Belgians, and Queen Fabiola. And another social event in the same place, but over a century ago, painted by Carl Haag and simply called Evening at Balmoral. Not only the social events, but the ordinary, everyday detail of the life of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert here at Balmoral was faithfully reflected by the painters who attended them here, and particularly by Edwin Landseer, who was a frequent visitor. This is one of his, Eos, the Prince's Greyhound. And the central feature of the painting, as so frequently with Landseer, is marvellously realized. This is virtuoso painting, so that the coat of the dog is full of that satiny, silken feeling, which makes it almost warm and palpable. The silk hat is there, presumably, to enhance and underline the sheen and gloss of the animal. Landseer's weakness was constantly to be dotting I's and crossing T's, so that he was forever putting his subjects into all sorts of stories and themes and all too frequently sentimental situations. There's a
a portrait, a self-portrait of him, just down the passage here, which he called not self-portrait, but the Connoisseurs. And although what it really is a self-portrait, he also painted these two dogs looking over his shoulders, as if they were moved by considerations which couldn't possibly occur to any self-respecting dog, ever. But when he painted what he simply saw in front of him, with no frills, he could be masterly. He painted a lot of the pets and animals they liked having about them. This was one of the Queen's dogs, called Dash, painted before she was even married, and a very dashing painting it is. This parrot also belonged to the Queen and was called Laurie. The feathers, so absolutely different after all in texture and feeling from fur, are as brilliantly handled as was the greyhound's coat. The two Brazilian monkeys are the same. Landseer's pastels are less well-known than the famous oil paintings. These are in the drawing room, studies of Gillies and others who attended the prince when he went deer stalking. This was John Grant, the head keeper. Lovely face.
Also at Balmoral, there's a dessert service in which the decoration consists entirely of copies of Landseer's paintings. Perhaps even more vividly, the Queen and her husband and their life together came alive, as it were, in her journals. In 1867, 6 years after the death of her husband, and after as many years of withdrawal, she decided upon a private circulation of extracts from these journals. The following year, it was put on public sale. 20,000 copies were sold immediately. It was an instant success, as is recalled by Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales.
I remember when I first read the journals myself, several years ago, and they immediately struck a chord. For instance, her first impressions of Balmoral, when she wrote, "All seemed to breathe freedom and peace, and to make one forget the world and its sad turmoils." Exactly what I feel. If you know and love Balmoral and its neighborhood as much as I do, you can instantly recognize the places she describes. Early in their years at Balmoral, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert converted this small Highland but and ben, or cottage, into a retreat for themselves where they could live with a minimum of fuss and experience the peace of the glorious landscape which it overlooks. And it was to be the subject of one of the best paintings by Landseer in the collection. The most entertaining descriptions in the journals are those of the expeditions organized by Prince Albert, when, with Queen Victoria usually mounted on a pony and Gillies to lead the way, the whole family, sensibly wrapped in plaids and with good stout boots, trekked to all corners of the estate and beyond, to the beautiful Garrawald Falls, or to climb the mountain Loch Nagar, wrapped in mist more often than not, and so beautifully described in the poem Dark Loch Nagar. On other expeditions, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert would ride miles over the hill tracks to spend a night incognito at some small inn. If they were lucky, the food was reasonable, but in one particular place, all they got was a scrawny old chicken, which, as Queen Victoria put it, no pudding and no fun. What the Queen's journals show, more than anything else, is her essential humanity, whether she was amused. And she was constantly amused, whether by a maid in curled papers or a visiting German who split his court breeches in the drawing room, or by people's kindness. In all her letters and journals, the most complimentary thing that Queen Victoria could say about anybody was that they were straightforward, and the direct, almost blunt speech of the Highlanders is what appealed to her most greatly.
how much the royal family enjoyed, and enjoy, the privacy and remoteness of the Scottish Highlands, the fact is that great events and great functions constantly draw them back to the capital, to Buckingham Palace, and above all, to Windsor Castle. Long, long ago, there was no need for monarchs to go to Balmoral for their sport. Hunting had always been the obsession of kings, an activity akin to war, which was, after all, their main business. And generation after generation of kings had hunted in the great forests which stretched across the south of England. Windsor itself first drew attention as a hunting ground. The castle, the greatest of all the royal palaces, is 20 miles up the Thames from London. King after king added to it. This great gateway was built by Henry VIII. Many mementos and portraits and memorabilia of past kings and queens are kept in the royal library at the castle. The library was originally built by Queen Elizabeth I, the daughter of Henry VIII. Here she delighted in the company of ambassadors and scholars. She spoke and wrote Latin fluently, French, Italian. She learnt Welsh and Greek. Like her father, she was a good musician, and she used her skills at the keyboard for flirtation, among other things, but never anymore. She pretended she might get married, but as everybody knows, it was a diplomatic weapon and nothing else. But she set her face against marriage. Never seemed surprising to me. Her own mother, after all, Anne Boleyn, had been beheaded, killed by her own father, whom she adored. And how could she have been other than frozen and wary? She wrote a poem about suspicion, and here it is in her own fully matured, exquisite hand. The poem is mature as well. No crooked leg, no bleared eye, no part deformed out of kind, nor yet so ugly half can be, as is the inward, suspicious mind. And it's signed Elizabeth, and opposite, also in her own hand, a drawing of a symbol, a celestial sphere with the signs of the zodiac round it. What it signified was understanding and true knowledge, and it was a device that she used constantly, in the end of books, in earrings, in her dress, and so on. Her dresses, like her portraits, were there to provide a quite definite image of monarchy. This was Diana, Gloriana, the fairy queen. Of no one was this sense of a portrait as a deliberate image more true than of King Charles I. This is how his court painter Van Dyck saw him. Charles I was a connoisseur who bought masterpieces from all over Europe. He was also the most tragic figure ever to sit upon the British throne, and ended up by being publicly beheaded by order of Parliament. And what is so extraordinary is that the paintings he bought and inspired indicate exactly what it was that led him to his doom. This aloof and fastidious man also believed in the absolute power under God of monarchs. The king was God's representative on earth. It was his right and his duty to govern, and the duty and the right of subjects was to be governed. Van Dyck saw King Charles I exactly as he wished to be seen, above all other men, almost divine, yet human. It was this vision of monarchy that was to prove intolerable to half the people of Britain, which led to a bitter civil war and finally to the awful moment when a king for the first time was publicly tried, condemned, and executed. It shocked the whole of Europe and, of course, drew much sympathy to his side. After his death, all sorts of relics were collected and kept and sold and cherished, many of them bogus, of course. as part of his progress towards martyrdom. This is a portrait of him done with his own hair. That's the claim, and who is to say that it's not sound? This is certainly the Shakespeare he had during his final imprisonment. It's annotated in his own writing, notes on the plays that he's read and so on, and this is the book on the flyleaf of which he wrote, Dum spiro spiro, while I breathe, I hope. And this was his watch. It's a kind of half between a watch and a clock. The watch he gave to Thomas Herbert, who'd been placed by the army as his principal guard, and who in fact was his sole attendant during the last weeks. It has a bell in it, it's a kind of alarm clock. And this is the famous shirt, the overshirt, the second shirt, which he asked Thomas Herbert to get out for him on the morning of his execution. On that day, he decided to wear two shirts, by reason, and these were his exact words, according to Thomas Herbert, by reason that the season is so sharp as will probably make me shake, which some observers will imagine proceeds from fear. I would have no such imputation. I fear not death. Death is not terrible to me. I am prepared. I bless my God. His behavior really was marvelous. It was a Cromwellian poet, after all, a parliamentarian marvel, who said he nothing commended nor mean upon that memorable scene. His son, Charles II, many of whose portraits and miniatures are also here in the Royal Library in Windsor Castle, was extremely different from his earnest and tragic father. It was a contemporary of Charles II who first called him the Merry Monarch. His last words were said to be, "Let not poor Nelly starve." And whether he actually said that or not, it's certain that he did pick up Nell Gwynn, the famous orange girl, outside a theatre in Drury Lane. It really is extraordinary how history and the royal collections seem to march hand in hand, whereas Van Dyck, in the days of Charles I, painted the king as a transcendental, almost divine monarch, what his successor, Sir Peter Lely, painted were the Windsor beauties, many, indeed most of whom were among the king's favourites. The fact is that Charles II had a passion for women. He made no bones about it and positively flaunted his mistresses. He showered them and the children they bore him with gifts and money and titles. Barbara Villiers, the Duchess of Cleveland, bore him 6 children, it seems. He looked after her and supported them handsomely. He kept on very good terms with his wife, Catherine of Braganza, throughout. She had no children ever. About the only one to whom he didn't give a title seems to have been Nell Gwynn. There must have been others, of course. Even so, Nell's son was created the first Duke of St. Albans. Nell herself is not here. These 10 portraits were of ladies of the court, and it was Charles II's sister-in-law who commissioned Peter Lely to paint them. The last portrait is Frances Stuart, Duchess of Richmond. Charles II, it was said, used to row himself alone, greatly shocked Samuel Pepys, along the Thames to her residence in Richmond. He wrote her a poem. It's an extraordinary piece of work, and I feel sure it reflects exactly the tone of the Restoration Court. Here's a verse from it. While alone to myself, I repeat all her charms. She I love may be locked in another man's arms. She may laugh at my cares, and so false she may be to say all the kind things she before said to me. Oh then, 'tis oh then that I think there's no hell like loving too well. It was written by Charles II for Francis, but I suppose in a way it was written to all of them, and there were indeed a great many. At the same time, it wasn't all trumpery and pleasure. It seems not to be altogether clear how the great series of Leonardo da Vinci drawings came into the Royal Collection, but it was certainly during this period, and Charles II might well have been responsible. In any event, acquired they were. There are something under 1,000 of them here at Windsor. And in a way, what they are is a kind of notebook of his life. Anything and everything he felt like remembering or exploring, he simply recorded there and then. His studio must have been chock-a-block with drawings. He drew everything. And so these drawings here range across a whole experience of life. This is easily the most important single collection of Leonardo drawings in existence. In fact, 2/3 of his total and stupendous output of drawings is here at Windsor. Here in the sense that they're from time to time displayed in other royal buildings and major galleries here and abroad. This last is not Leonardo, but a caricature of King George III by Gilray. George III was savaged by British cartoonists. All these cartoons were in the Royal Archive. The things universally said about George III on both sides of the Atlantic was not only that he was intermittently mad and tyrannous by disposition, but that he was fundamentally stupid and the king who lost America. This is rubbish. He was very much a constitutional monarch. It was the great landowners who governed the kingdom, and it was their policy which lost America. In any event, neither king nor parliament could have held America. The child was vastly outgrowing the parent, and the split was inevitable. In effect, George III has consistently been denied not only virtue, but accomplishments. Actually, even as a youth, he had shown surprising talents.
He had a passion for order. In this drawer are some of the architectural drawings he produced. This is the language of classical architecture: pediments and architraves, columns and friezes. With classical orders: Doric, Ionic, Corinthian. He did over 80 of these drawings. These are his drawings too, of Baroque and neoclassical architecture, all done with immense care and thought. He took a great deal of trouble over the detail. And really they are of an enormously high standard, I think. And I had no idea, until I searched the library here, what an amazingly talented draftsman he was. And he didn't just perfect one technique. These drawings are in chalk and charcoal. Some are copies of engravings by established artists. Others are of buildings he would have known. This is Zion House. There's no doubt that George III, as Prince of Wales, had a very good education, and it was varied as well as being thorough. He was the first British monarch to study science as a young man. This is his microscope, which was specially designed for him. And it has all sorts of interesting little drawers in it, one of which here has the original slides that were made for the microscope. And I'm told that the things that are inside the slides are 18th century fleas. There's one very big one here, horrible looking thing.
George III, had he ever had the alternative of being anything other than king, would almost certainly have become a first-rate draftsman or technician. He was always drawn towards anything mechanical. These were all made for him, and most of them were for early experiments in electricity. Electricity was the great interest of the day. Benjamin Franklin was, after all, his contemporary. Louis XV in France gave, it is said, electric shocks to 250 monks at a single throw. No such claim, alas, can be made for King George of England, whose experiments were on a rather more modest scale, but they were experiments. Certainly it was this passion that drew him towards watches and clocks. He actually could and did take watches and clocks to pieces, which is more than most of us can do. He could assemble and dismantle them. Here are directions in his own hand called directions for mounting a watch. Place the upper plate, it says. Place the third wheel into the upper plate. The last one, I suppose always the last one, is put on the hands. The great pride of his collection was this, the Mudge gold watch, made by Thomas Mudge and said, rather sensationally, to be the most historically important watch in the world. It's the first watch ever made which had what watchmakers call a lever escapement, and that in itself is enough to make it historically extremely significant. He developed an abiding interest in clocks and had them in every room in his palaces, and as a matter of fact, most of them are ticking away to this day. The Windsor Castle gateways, of course, are all guarded by the Queen's troops. The idea that each regiment in the British Army should have its own special dress, that is, be uniform, was an entirely royal initiative taken by George II's son, the Duke of Cumberland, in the 1730s. This was what first brought into being the idea of brilliant regimentals specified to the smallest degree. The Duke didn't have much of an eye for a picture, but he commissioned these paintings of his beloved uniforms, and they make a fantastic record for the military historian. George II also gave strong support to the remodelling of the Horse Guards Parade. This was a highly dramatic project, and it finally provided, in the middle of the 18th century, a fit setting for the spectacular Trooping the Colour, which George II was the first British king to witness, and which has gone on once a year ever since. This is the occasion, the official birthday of the monarch, when the battalion of the Household Division providing the Queen's Guard troops its colour. This huge painting at Windsor Castle is of George III, the king who was so taken up with science, but he's not in a battle, he's only in a review. His son, next to him, the Prince of Wales, who was eventually to become the Prince Regent and then George IV, was on fire to join the army and to serve against Napoleon, as all his 5 brothers had done. But this was out of the question for the heir to the throne, and he was only allowed to go to war in pictures. His plumed helmet is still kept at Windsor. For over 20 years, Britain was almost continuously at war with France. It was a period of great peril for the nation. Napoleon had to be held at bay, and the Duke of Wellington was one of the many who carried the heat and burden of the day. This baton, belonging to a captured French field marshal, was sent to the Prince by General Wellington. The Prince saw his chance and sent a new baton by return to the General, which had the effect of making him a field marshal as well. This was Napoleon's sword when he was first consul. Inside, Windsor Castle to this day carries evidence of the Prince Regent's obsession with war and warfare in general. He did everything on the grand scale. He was extravagant to an unbelievable degree. He fell constantly in and out of love with a succession of huge ladies. He became one of the really great collectors, and he finally came to believe that he probably had indeed served at the Battle of Waterloo himself. This splendid pair of double-barreled flintlock pistols was given to him by Louis XVIII of France. Of course, they are just beautiful pieces of craftsmanship. They were never actually fired in anger. Mind you, this was the age of the duel. Not that the Prince Regent ever fought a duel on his own behalf. He could hardly do so as the heir apparent. His brother, the Duke of York, in point of fact, did fight a duel, and what's more, for the Prince Regent. What is still more, he had a tuft of his hair clipped off for his pains. I don't think he used these pistols, however. What they are is exquisite. The fact is that he collected furniture, sculpture, and porcelain all through his life. Today, some of the most splendid pieces are gathered in these magnificent drawing rooms at Windsor, which are not among the staterooms open to the public, but are used by the Queen on formal occasions. These small bronzes were highly fashionable in 18th century France. These are from one of the greatest of all the china services in the whole collection. Some say this particular service is the greatest in the world. It was originally commissioned as a set of 445 pieces by a French king at a cost in those days, 1783, of over $250,000. Today, of course, these pieces are virtually priceless. George IV was a patron as well as a collector, and he commissioned a lot of work from his own contemporaries, some of which are among the favourite paintings of the present Duke of Edinburgh and hang in the private dining room at Windsor.
This painting of him when he was about 18 is by George Stubbs. And Stubbs was a painter in the best English tradition, and he painted all the things best loved by the English, themselves, their horses, dogs, stags, and country life in general. And he was one of the best animal painters of any time. And it was characteristic of the Prince that he was able to recognize and employ the best artistic talent available right from the start. And in his early 20s, he commissioned Stubbs to paint a number of pictures for him. And I find they have a very special quality about them. His backgrounds alone seem to capture the real atmosphere of the country. And the Prince was not only very fond of hunting, he rode to hounds 4 times a week. He was also enthusiastic about racing. and many of Stubbs' paintings commemorate his racehorses. In his youth, he was remarkably successful. His horses won 185 races in 3 years. Stubbs' paintings include several portraits of the people who looked after his horses. This is William Anderson, his head groom. And this splendid figure is Samuel Thomas, his coachman. And he's standing beside the Prince's phaeton. The 18th century was a competitive age, and the Prince was always trying to go faster. And this involved him in the development of lighter and better sprung carriages, using all the latest materials and techniques made possible by the Industrial Revolution. In fact, his coach builder, William Cook, became known as King Cook. Well, the phaeton was the first of the self-drive vehicles which were developed at a time when driving yourself became popular and was popularized by George IV. And the first ones were constructed with this, really they were a scaled-down version of the mail coach. And they were called mail phaetons for that reason. And the basic construction was a perch underneath here, which connected the two axles together. Now, although this one here is an older vehicle, it shows a more modern construction, because instead of the perch running through the middle, they've got these two wrought iron bars on either side here, holding the thing together. And this crane neck effect here, the idea was so that the front wheels could go under the carriage, and you got a much tighter turning circle. Whereas with a perch, of course, the wheels would hit that and restrict the turning circle. And this is the sort of vehicle that George IV would have driven as a young man and really done long distances. Now, this is a vehicle which he had built for himself as an old man. You can see it's the same type of construction as this. It's got the two frames on either side, but it's built for comfort rather than speed. There's no problem about turning circle. The wheels are smaller, and the smaller wheels, of course, made it more difficult to go fast. And it was really the height of comfort. You could drive it yourself or be driven in this way with postilions. This was added, because it's much lower, this was added to keep the mud from flying into your face, and also it hid the back end of the horses.
George IV enjoyed driving these phaetons. He once wrote to his brother, the Duke of York, saying with the utmost pleasure that he had driven a phaeton 22 miles in 2 hours. And they were not easy vehicles to handle then, any more than they are now.
Oh, well, I think it would be true to say that the example which the Prince set in driving himself set a new fashion throughout Europe. Whereas before it had been the smart thing to ride or to be driven, it was now the thing to do to drive yourself.
The fashion didn't last long. George IV lived on into the age of the railway, and railways were central to the life and reign of Victoria, who soon after the death of George IV became Queen. She always travelled, of course, in special trains.
This was the sitting room in Queen Victoria's royal coach on the London and North Western Railway, the old North Western, built specially for her by the railway, and in scale and furnishing quite unique. It is, in fact, 2 coaches made into one, and it travelled normally in the middle of the royal train. There were other coaches for the Prince of Wales and for others and for equerries, making a dozen coaches in all, making a procession. And it would be in this sitting room that the Queen herself would travel. in the north and the west, to Liverpool and Manchester, and of course to and from Balmoral between 1869 and up to her death in 1901. All this, the furnishings are blue, watered silk, quilted, and quilting up on the ceiling, that's watered silk as well, white. And behind here are these sashes, kind of velvet, I think, with the shamrock and the thistle and the rose worked into them. There's ventilation up here. If you wanted more or less air, VR revealed around the edges. There's electric light. They put that in 1895, but Queen Victoria didn't care for it. She preferred the old oil lamps, and she stuck to them. There are electric bells. She appreciated those and liked them. They're marked attendant. And what's more, the attendant has to attend to it because it won't stop until he actually does so. And having stopped, it still rings a bit in the mind. The attendant then does what he has to, including if he wants to stop the train. It says quite plainly, stop the train, and you pull that in order to do so, with no nonsense about £5 penalty for improper use or anything of that kind. The attendant had a little kitchen in here in which he could prepare tea and coffee and drinks of that kind. All the timber throughout seems to be yew. Very beautiful, very hard, lovely wood. Not that facility for meals were necessary at all, because Queen Victoria didn't like having meals on trains. Whether it was messy or untidy, I don't know. Anyway, she didn't like it. What she liked doing was getting out of the train and going to a restaurant and having a proper meal there. And on the run to Balmoral, it would be tea at Leamington, quite a large meal, I fancy, and then after the night, breakfast at Perth. Moving from the day room to the bedroom, she would go through this little compartment here, this arch. This used to be, at one time, one of those concertina connections, those bellow connections you have between one coach and another on trains. In fact, was the first ever put between two coaches in this country. But in the 90s, when she was very old, the old lady didn't like walking through this shuddering cavern. She didn't care for it at all, and so didn't wish to move through it, and therefore they made it into one single coach. And she would walk through it here into what is now, and what was then, a quite straightforward bedroom. She liked, if possible, to be accompanied when she was travelling, and if possible, by one or other of her daughters. And on at least one occasion, she was accompanied by one of her granddaughters, the daughter of the Queen of Prussia. On at least one occasion, because we know of a letter written by that granddaughter, and a very touching account she gives of travelling with her grandmother on this train. This, I suppose, was the room where staff sat during the day. "I wish you had a royal train like this," wrote the granddaughter. The royal train was envied by other members, of other royal families. "Grandmamma," she went on, "Grandmamma reminded me of you. She looked so clean and dear, all in white, and it took some time before she was settled. There were the shawls and the cushions and the lamps to put out, and so on."
And so Queen Victoria travelled throughout her reign, as have all monarchs ever since, seeing and being seen. She was incurably inquisitive, but however far and wide she travelled, she sooner or later had to be on her way back to Windsor Castle. Windsor Castle, huge and rambling, contains within itself all sorts of separate establishments. Thus, this handsome property was designed by Edwin Lutyens, the famous architect who built the city of Delhi in India. This is the drawing room. This portrait of George V is by Sir William Orpen, and the furniture and furnishings generally are in the style of Louis XVI. A handsome property, and still much admired, although it's only 8 feet long and 5 feet wide. It is, of course, the Queen's doll's house. And that's the only trick we're going to play with it. It needs no trickery, being an absolutely unbelievable tour de force in its own right. What it is a miniature Palladian country house. It's kept here in Windsor Castle. Thousands of people have seen it, millions over the years. And the sides go up to reveal the rooms inside. It was given to Queen Mary in 1923 by a group of friends and artists. They simply thought up the idea as being in itself a gesture of national goodwill following the abominations of the 1418 war. They thought it would please the Queen herself very much, as indeed it did. And they saw it as a means of raising funds for the charitable causes which occupied Queen Mary and later Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, who is now, in that sense, responsible for it. This is the library, and there above the fireplace is a portrait of Queen Elizabeth I by William Nicholson. And it is by William Nicholson, there's no question of reducing things here. This is what he painted. And the house as a whole is full of little tiny paintings by painters and artists. In fact, hosts of scholars and writers and painters contributed to the success of this doll's house. Lavery and Orpen and Cope and Munnings and so on are around the walls. Everything is of a scale of 1 to 12. Things are 1/12 of their real size. Here are two little tiny pipes, so small that I won't even try to pick them up. Here are two shotguns. I can pick one of those up. They break, of course, as they should, and particularly as they should because there are also cartridges for them. Here are the cartridges. They fit. I won't try and put them in, but there they are. The books were specially made, printed, and in many cases specially written for this particular house and for this particular edition. There are books here by all sorts of people: Max Beerbohm, Arnold Bennett, Joseph Conrad, Conan Doyle, Thomas Hardy. I know where the Thomas Hardy is. I think this is it. Here it is, written in an illuminated script, very beautifully written, not, I think, by Thomas Hardy himself, but very nicely done. Poems. Some were written rather more specially than those. Robert Graves, I noted, didn't actually write special poems for the occasion, but he abridged them and called them, very characteristically, poems, it says, abridged for dolls and princes. Max Beerbohm is one of the many who wrote quite specifically for the edition. This is the Beerbohm. And he wrote a little essay, very elegant, very characteristic, and it starts, how good it is to be here, and how delightful to be working in this perfectly wonderful library. For as long as I can remember, I have always wished to be very small. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, the present trustee or custodian of the doll's house, has herself acquired a new home during the last few years. Right at the other end of the kingdom from Windsor, the coast of Caithness in the far north of Scotland faces the remote islands of the Orkneys in the North Sea. It's flat, desolate, and very, very windy. And it was up here, after the death of her husband, King George VI, that the Queen Mother acquired a home on the cliffs, the Castle of May.
I was driving along from a high road over there, and we looked down, we saw this old castle. And, you know, it always intrigues one. So we went and had a look at it. And then I discovered that it was going to be pulled down. And I thought, oh dear. Then I thought I must try and save it. Because I think it is one of the few 16th century houses left in this part of Scotland. So I took it on, and it wasn't in a very good state. You know, the roof was really off. And I think it took about 12 years to build it up, little by little, you know, roof on first, bathrooms, water, electric light, which was a great thrill. And so it's been a rather lovely thing, you know, to build up something that might have gone forever.
The garden is laid out, as it were, in strips between high walls because of the incessant winds. Roses, not unexpectedly, are very much in evidence. This rose, Elizabeth of Glamis, is named after the owner. The castle itself dates from the 16th century, and renovated must now look much as it did 400 years ago. It's the most northerly castle in Britain. It's quite small, and inside it naturally carries the tastes and characteristics of its present owner. Once every year, the royal yacht Britannia sails round the coast of Scotland, and equally regularly, greetings are passed, by rocket so to speak, from the latest of all the royal residences, the old castle on the coast, to the most modern of them, the palace afloat, Her Majesty's yacht Britannia. Prince Philip is himself an experienced naval officer who saw active service throughout World War II. And it's not perhaps surprising that Britannia has been among the more important projects of the current reign. She's travelled further and more widely than any of the earlier royal ships. She's the first genuinely ocean-going royal yacht designed as such. She's also so designed that if necessary, she can be transformed into a naval hospital ship. She's often been used for various purposes in fleet exercises. In the last 12 months, she has in fact circumnavigated the globe. During the same summer, she sailed into New York Harbor on the bicentennial visit to the United States. Britannia also took the Queen through the Baltic into Helsinki, the capital of Finland. These islands guard the entrance to Helsinki Harbour. The yacht serves, of course, as a proper place for a state banquet. The presence of this floating palace allows the Queen to entertain the President of Finland on British territory as well as being his guest in his country. The Queen has entertained very many heads of state in this yacht. There have been 17 fully fledged state occasions altogether and scores of Commonwealth visits. The banquet itself allows the use and display of tableware and services and objects of all kinds from the collection, as do indeed so many of the great occasions in which the Queen, as head of state, is constantly involved. Every year, the Queen, as head of state of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, walks in solemn procession through the Houses of Parliament in London. She's here to declare open the new session of Parliament, surrounded by ancient symbols of monarchy. In front of her is carried the sword of state. On her head, throughout the proceedings, the Queen has worn the imperial state crown.
The imperial state crown. It's normally kept at the Tower, but I have it here at Buckingham Palace because I wore it this morning at the state opening of Parliament. The crown as you see it now was made for Queen Victoria in 1838, but many of the individual stones have a much longer history. The oldest is probably this sapphire, which is said to have been worn as a ring by Edward the Confessor nearly 1,000 years ago. The pearls are said to have belonged to the first Queen Elizabeth. The story goes that this strangely shaped ruby was given to the Black Prince after a battle in Spain in 1367. I always like to think of it being worn by Henry V during the Battle of Agincourt. It's difficult to be absolutely certain about some of the other stones, because after the execution of Charles I, Cromwell had the crown jewels broken up and sold. The Black Prince's ruby, for instance, was sold for £4, but it was returned to the crown after the restoration of Charles II. This great diamond is a more recent addition. The first star of Africa is even bigger and is in the scepter. Both of them are parts of an immense diamond which was found quite by chance by the manager of a mine in South Africa in 1905. Apparently, he just dug it out of the rock face with his walking stick. This is a model which shows you what it looked like. The whole Cullinan diamond, as it came to be known, was given to my great-grandfather, King Edward VII, on his birthday. The Dutch jeweller, who had to split it before it could be polished, was so overcome by the responsibility that he fainted as he struck the blow. But he did it perfectly. There are two smaller pieces which my grandmother always referred to as the chips. This crown is worn at openings of Parliament and after a coronation. The other one, the St. Edward's crown, is only worn once, at the moment of crowning.